She married a man she thought was broke, never realizing he was a secret billionaire. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The sky over Austin was gray, the kind that promised rain but never quite delivered. The streets shimmered with puddles left from the morning drizzle. Mark Davis, a 23-year-old law student, hurried down the sidewalk with his worn backpack slung over one shoulder. The soles of his shoes were almost gone, and so was his patience. He was drowning in student loans, part-time shifts, and the hospital bills left behind by his late father. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mark Davis speaking. A calm, commanding female voice replied, Mr. Davis, this is Eleanor Brooks. I would like to meet with you. It is about your financial situation. Please come to Brooks Bistro at 7 this evening. The call ended before he could ask a single question. That evening, the city lights blinked like scattered stars reflected on wet pavement. Mark arrived at the upscale restaurant, pushing through the heavy glass doors. The air inside smelled of roasted coffee and money. Every table sparkled with crystal and silver. He felt out of place instantly. His jacket was too thin, his tie borrowed. At a corner table sat a woman in her early 70s. Posture straight, silver hair styled with precision. Her eyes were sharp, her suit impeccable. She gestured toward the seat across from her. Mark, she said, her tone smooth but firm. Please sit down. He obeyed, unsure why a woman like her would even know his name. Mrs. Brooks, what is this about? A praying. In Germanis. Welt happen. With your wise. I know about your debts, she said calmly, stirring her tea without looking at him. Your father's medical bills. The tuition you are struggling to pay. I also know you are about to lose your apartment. I can solve all of that. Mark blinked, stunned. I am sorry, but how do you know all this? Eleanor set her spoon down gently and met his eyes. Because I make it my business to know. What I need is simple. Marry me. The words landed like thunder in his chest. Excuse me? She leaned forward slightly. You heard me. This is not about romance. It is a business arrangement. You will be my husband. In return, I will clear every debt you owe and ensure your family is taken care of. A desterting. Mark let out a breathless laugh, thinking it must be a joke. You are serious? Completely, she replied. You are young, unmarried, and desperate enough to consider it. I need companionship and control of my legacy. You need freedom from your burdens. Think of it as a contract. He stared at her, speechless. Her tone was steady, but her eyes held a flicker of loneliness, one that unsettled him more than her proposal. This is insane, he whispered. Why me? You do not even know me. Eleanor smiled faintly. Perhaps not, but I can read character. You will do. Mark pushed back his chair, the legs scraping against the marble floor. I cannot answer right now. It one was all. Of course, she said smoothly. Take your time, but do not take too long. My offer does not stay open forever. Outside, the drizzle had turned into steady rain. Mark walked home, soaked, the night cold against his skin, his mind spinning. His mother's face flashed before him, pale, tired, clutching her medical bills at the kitchen table. His younger sister's tuition notice sat unopened in his backpack. By the time he reached their small rented apartment, he already knew what he had to do. His mother looked up when he entered. You are late, sweetheart. Everything all right? He hesitated. Someone offered me a way out. A woman, rich. She wants marriage in exchange for paying our debts. In Macing de Great 9, his mother's eyes widened, but she did not look shocked, only worried. Mark, that sounds unbelievable. But if she truly means it, maybe it is worth thinking about. You have sacrificed enough. He sank into the chair beside her, head in his hands. Marry someone I do not love? That cannot be right. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Sometimes saving yourself is not wrong, my son. Sometimes it is the only way left. Rain drummed softly against the window, and Mark sat in silence. Somewhere deep inside, reason and desperation fought for control. Finally, he whispered to himself, maybe this is the only way to keep us afloat. This Wanner, the lighters bailed in. And so, a week later, in a quiet courthouse under the pale Texas sky, Mark Davis signed his name beside Eleanor Brooks's on a marriage certificate that did not promise love-only obligation. He slipped a ring onto her finger, the echo of their vows fading into the hollow stillness of the room. She turned to him with a graceful smile that did not reach her eyes. Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis. Outside, thunder rolled, and the rain kept falling. The rain had not stopped since the courthouse ceremony. Mark sat in the back seat of the taxi, watching the city blur past the window, wondering how his life had changed so completely in just 7 days. He had expected to feel relief after signing away his debts, but instead, there was only a heavy silence that clung to him like the damp air. The cab slowed as they turned through an iron gate that rose taller than any he had ever seen. The driveway wound upward between rows of trimmed hedges until a mansion appeared, glowing under the drizzle like a marble palace. For a moment, Mark thought the driver had taken him to the wrong address. This is it, the driver said quietly. The front door opened before Mark could ring the bell. Eleanor Brooks stood there, framed by golden light from the chandelier behind her. Her posture was perfect, her face unreadable. Welcome home, Mr. Davis, she said. Home. The word felt foreign in her mouth. Mark followed her inside. The floors were polished wood, the ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into shadow. Every surface gleamed. Paintings lined the hallways, portraits of people who looked both distant and important. A housekeeper in uniform appeared, silent as a ghost, and took Mark's wet coat. Eleanor gestured toward the grand staircase. Your room is on the east wing. Dinner will be served at 7 sharp. I expect punctuality. Her tone was calm but absolute, the kind of tone that left no space for argument. Yes, Mrs. Brooks, Mark replied automatically, then corrected himself. Eleanor. She gave the faintest nod. Good. Try to make yourself comfortable. He carried his suitcase up the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the vast hallway. His room looked more like a suite in a luxury hotel. King-size bed, antique furniture, tall windows overlooking a garden lit by lanterns. It was beautiful, but it felt sterile, like everything in the house had been polished to hide its loneliness. At dinner, the long dining table could have seated 20, but only 2 chairs were occupied. Mark sat at one end, Eleanor at the other. The distance between them felt like a mile. A chef served steak, wine, and a dessert so perfect it looked fake. Eleanor ate in quiet precision, her fork and knife moving like a clock's hands. Mark tried to break the silence. You live here alone? For years now, she replied without looking up. My husband passed away long ago. I have no children. That is why I decided on this arrangement. Her words were cool, businesslike, but for a moment he caught something in her expression, a flicker of grief quickly hidden behind control. And me? He asked. What exactly do you expect from me? Presence, she said simply. Attend social events. Smile when required. Speak when spoken to. Beyond that, live as you wish. I will not interfere in your studies or your family matters, but there are rules. She unfolded a single sheet of paper and slid it toward him. The words agreement of conduct were printed neatly at the top. Rule 1. No romantic involvement outside the marriage. Rule 2. Appear together at all family or business functions. Rule 3. Maintain discretion at all times. Rule 4. No public affection unless initiated for social appearances. Mark read each line, his throat tightening. You really thought of everything. I am a woman who has built an empire, she said. Control is not a habit I easily abandon. After dinner, she stood. We will attend a charity gala tomorrow evening. It will be your first public appearance as my husband. I suggest you rest. When she left, the silence returned, thick and endless. Mark walked through the hall, stopping before a massive portrait near the staircase. It showed a younger Eleanor beside a man who looked kind but tired. There was something about her smile in that painting. It was real, different from the poised mask she wore now. Later that night, Mark sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone. Messages from classmates filled his screen. Group projects, bar schedules, midterm reminders. None of them had any idea where he was or what he had done. He turned the phone off and stared out the window. The rain had stopped, but fog hung low over the gardens. Somewhere deep in his chest, Guilt began to settle like dust. He whispered to the quiet room, "What have I gotten myself into?" The next evening came too quickly. Mark stood before the mirror, straightening his black suit. A tailor had delivered it that morning, perfectly fitted, along with shoes that gleamed like mirrors. When he walked downstairs, Eleanor was already waiting. She wore an emerald dress that caught the light like a jewel. For a moment, he forgot how different their worlds were. In the car, neither spoke. The city lights stretched ahead, reflected in the rain-specked windows. When they arrived at the hotel ballroom, cameras flashed, and murmurs spread through the crowd. "Mrs. Brooks, so lovely to see you," a man greeted her. His eyes flicked toward Mark, curious. "And this must be your husband?" Eleanor's hand slipped effortlessly through Mark's arm. "Yes," she said with a composed smile. "Mark Davis." The cameras clicked again. She leaned closer, whispering so only he could hear, "Smile, Mr. Davis. This is the life you agreed to." Mark forced a smile, feeling the weight of every flash like lightning on his skin. For the first time, he realized this arrangement was not just about money or survival. It was a performance, one that demanded everything from him. And somewhere behind the applause and music, a single question echoed in his mind. What happens when the show ends? The ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers, filled with soft laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint scent of roses. Every detail spoke of wealth and control, just like Eleanor Brooks herself. Mark walked beside her, his hands steady but his heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. They had been introduced to a dozen people within minutes, board members, politicians, heirs, and wives dripping with diamonds. Each handshake felt rehearsed, each smile perfectly measured. Eleanor carried herself with the grace of someone who had ruled this world for decades. Mark followed, saying little, mimicking her calm. During the charity auction, Eleanor spoke confidently about her foundation's work, every sentence calculated yet sincere. Mark watched her from the edge of the stage, realizing she was more than just a wealthy woman. She was sharp, respected, and completely in control. When the crowd applauded, she gave him a brief glance that said, "Your turn to play the part." Later, as waiters passed champagne, a man approached, tall, confident, and far too familiar with Eleanor. "Eleanor Brooks," he greeted warmly, taking her hand. "It has been a long time." Her smile was polite but distant. "Mr. Langford, I did not expect to see you tonight." The man turned to Mark. "And this must be your husband?" The pause was deliberate. Mark nodded, forcing a steady tone. "Mark Davis." Langford's smirk widened. "Quite a change from your usual type, Eleanor." For a second, the air around them froze. Eleanor's jaw tightened, but she recovered instantly. "Yes," she said smoothly. "I suppose I decided to value integrity over wealth this time." Mark almost choked on his drink. The insult was elegant and deadly. Langford's smile faltered. "Enjoy your evening," he muttered before walking away. Eleanor exhaled quietly, eyes still on the crowd. "Do not mind him. Some men cannot stand losing control." Mark glanced at her. "And you can?" Her lips curved faintly. "Control is not something I lose, Mr. Davis. It is something I lend." When the event ended, the ride home was silent again. But this silence was different. It was not the emptiness of strangers. It was heavy, charged, alive. At the mansion, Mark walked her to the door. She paused, hand resting on the doorknob. "You handled yourself well tonight," she said. "Better than I expected." He shrugged lightly. "I learn fast." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer than necessary before she turned away. "Good night, Mark." He stood in the hall after she left, the scent of her perfume still in the air, something floral and cold, like rain on glass. He did not know why his chest felt tight. Days turned into weeks. Their lives settled into rhythm. By day, Mark attended law school and studied late into the night. By evening, he was Eleanor's companion at meetings, dinners, and fundraisers. The public adored the unlikely couple, the young ambitious husband, and the legendary widow who had found companionship again. Behind closed doors, their conversations began to change. They no longer revolved around appearances or instructions. One night, over coffee in the library, Mark asked, "Why me, really? Out of all the people in this city, why choose someone like me?" Eleanor looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Because you had nothing to gain from me when we met. Everyone else in my world wants something. You only wanted to survive." Her honesty startled him. That is not exactly romantic. She smiled faintly. I told you this was not about romance. But sometimes, honesty is rarer than love. Mark studied her face, the way her expression softened under the warm lamplight. For the first time, he saw the lines of tiredness beneath her strength. She looked human, vulnerable even. Later that night, unable to sleep, Mark walked through the dim corridors of the mansion. The rain had returned, tapping against the tall windows. As he passed Eleanor's study, he noticed the door slightly open. Inside, she sat alone, staring at an old photograph, her and her late husband, smiling under the Texas sun. He could have walked away, but something stopped him. He knocked gently. She turned, startled, then composed herself. Could not sleep? Neither could you, he said softly. Eleanor set the photo frame down. Old memories have a way of finding me when it rains. Mark hesitated before asking, did you love him? Her gaze drifted to the window. Yes, but love did not save him. Money could not either. After he died, I built walls around myself instead of homes. It felt safer that way. He stepped closer, careful not to intrude. Maybe walls keep the pain out, but they keep people out too. Eleanor looked up, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. For a second, something unspoken passed between them. Loneliness, recognizing loneliness. She broke the silence first. You speak like a man twice your age, Mark. Debt has a way of aging people fast, he replied. A faint smile touched her lips, the first genuine one he had seen since the wedding. Good night, Mr. Davis. He nodded. Good night, Mrs. Brooks. When he left the study, the sound of rain followed him down the hall, steady and soft. He realized that for the first time since this arrangement began, he was not thinking about the contract or the money. He was thinking about her, the woman behind the rules, the one who had built an empire to protect a heart that still refused to stop feeling. And somewhere deep inside, Mark began to wonder if this marriage built on paper and signatures might be turning into something real. Winter crept into the city slowly, wrapping the Brooks estate in silver frost. The air inside the mansion felt warmer than usual, filled with the faint crackle of the fireplace and the scent of cedar wood. Weeks had passed since that quiet night in the study, but something between Mark and Eleanor had changed. They no longer spoke only when necessary. They laughed sometimes. They shared late-night coffee in the library. The distance that once defined them had begun to fade. One evening, Eleanor entered the sitting room carrying 2 glasses of wine. Mark looked up from his laptop. You are still working? She asked, handing him a glass. Trying to stay ahead of the next exam, he said. Law professors do not believe in mercy. She smiled lightly. You remind me of myself at your age. Always planning, always preparing for the next battle. Mark looked at her, studying the calm in her posture. And did all that planning make you happy? Her smile faltered. It made me successful. That is not the same thing, he said quietly. Eleanor stared into the fire. Happiness is a luxury, Mark. Some of us traded it long ago for survival. He wanted to argue, but her tone held a truth he could not challenge. Instead, he said softly, you do not have to keep trading anymore. The room went silent. Outside, snow began to fall against the tall windows, white and slow. She looked at him, then not as an obligation or an arrangement, but as a man who saw her without the armor. For the first time, she seemed unsure of what to say. The next morning, they attended a business meeting together. Eleanor's company was facing a vote on a new investment plan. Mark sat beside her, listening to the board members argue. One of them, a younger executive named Victor Hale, smirked openly at Mark. So this is your husband, Victor said during a break. Interesting choice. You always liked challenges, Eleanor. Before she could respond, Mark stood. His voice was calm but steady. With all due respect, sir, my presence here is not a challenge. It is a commitment, and if you value this company's future, you should focus less on gossip and more on integrity. The room went quiet. Victor flushed, muttered an excuse, and left. Eleanor's eyes stayed on Mark, her expression unreadable. But later, as they walked to the car, she said softly, no one has ever defended me in that room before. You did not need me to, he replied. But you deserved it. Those an example late nighted. She said nothing more, yet the look she gave him held more gratitude than words ever could. That night, Eleanor found herself awake, replaying the moment over and over, the firmness in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes. Somewhere between obligation and affection, something real had begun to take root. In another room, Mark lay awake too, staring at the ceiling, knowing that what had started as a contract was turning into a promise his heart was beginning to believe. Spring arrived quietly, melting the last traces of snow around the Brooks estate. The gardens were alive again, roses climbing the fences, the sound of water trickling through the fountain outside the library window. But inside the mansion, a new kind of tension began to build. The annual Brooks Foundation Gala was approaching, and for Eleanor, it was the most important event of the year. For Mark, it was the ultimate test of his role as her husband. 3 days before the gala, tailors and assistants filled the house. Mark was fitted for a tuxedo while photographers discussed lighting angles. Eleanor moved through the chaos with her usual composure, giving quiet orders that everyone obeyed. When she passed by Mark, she paused, adjusting the knot of his tie with deliberate precision. "You will be fine," she said. "Just remember to smile when the cameras flash." Mark met her eyes. "You make it sound easy." "It is not," she replied, almost smiling. "But we do it anyway." On the night of the gala, the ballroom was transformed into a world of gold and glass. Guests in gowns and tuxedos filled the space, their laughter echoing beneath the chandeliers. The band played soft jazz, photographers lined the entrance. Eleanor descended the grand staircase with Mark beside her, both of them perfectly poised. As they moved through the crowd, whispers followed them. "She actually married him?" someone murmured. "He looks half her age." Eleanor ignored the comments, her expression serene. Mark, however, felt the sting of every word. Still, he kept his smile steady. Halfway through the evening, as Eleanor prepared to give her speech, the power flickered. A murmur spread across the room. Someone had accidentally spilled champagne near the electrical cables. Before anyone could panic, Mark was already there, helping the staff fix the mess, keeping guests calm. When the lights returned, the crowd applauded not for the staff, but for him. Eleanor took the stage, her voice clear through the microphone. "Tonight, I am reminded that true partnership is not built on appearances or convenience. It is built on trust and courage, both of which I have been fortunate to rediscover." Her gaze found Mark in the crowd. For a moment, it was as if no one else existed. After the speech, as guests mingled again, an older woman approached Eleanor. "You seem happier this year," she said kindly. "Marriage suits you." Eleanor smiled, a real one this time. "Perhaps it does." Later, when the music slowed, Mark and Eleanor found themselves alone on the balcony. The city lights shimmered below. She turned to him. "You handled yourself perfectly tonight," she said softly. "You even made the press like you." He chuckled. "That might be the greatest miracle yet." The silence between them grew gentle. Eleanor's hand rested on the railing beside his, their fingers almost touching. "Thank you, Mark," she said quietly, "for being more than what I asked for. Everywhere be daps. In the sever. In this lover and sever." He looked at her, the night wind brushing through her silver hair. "You do not have to thank me. You made me part of something worth protecting." For the first time, she could not find a single word to say. And in that silence, under the glow of the city, the distance between them finally disappeared. The days after the gala felt strangely calm, almost peaceful. The press praised Eleanor and Mark as the most unexpected yet graceful couple of the season. Photographs of them at the event appeared in every business magazine, and for once, the headlines were kind. Eleanor seemed lighter, her usual sharpness softened by something close to warmth. But peace rarely lasted long in her world. One afternoon, as Mark returned from class, he found Eleanor in her study, papers spread across her desk, her expression unreadable. The air in the room was tight. "What happened?" he asked. She looked up slowly. "Someone leaked details of our marriage contract." Mark froze. "Leaked? To the press?" Eleanor nodded. "Not yet, but it will be. I received an anonymous message this morning demanding money to keep it quiet." His stomach dropped. "Who would do that?" "Someone with access," she said coldly. "Someone inside my company. Maybe even someone close to my board." She stood, walking to the window. Her reflection looked like glass, strong but fragile. "If this story gets out, everything we built will fall apart. They will call it a scandal, a farce. They will say I married you for sympathy, or you married me for money." Mark stepped closer. "Then we fight it. Together." Eleanor turned to him, her voice lower now. "You do not understand, Mark. I have lived long enough to know how quickly public respect disappears. They forgive youth, not age. Especially not women like me. Her words hit him like cold wind. She was not afraid of losing money. She was afraid of losing dignity. That night, she barely spoke. The mansion felt different. No music, no laughter. Only the echo of footsteps in long halls. Mark sat alone in the library, reading the contract they had signed months ago. The words that once felt like salvation now looked like shackles. The next morning, the first article appeared online. Marriage of convenience? Inside the secret contract of Eleanor Brooks and her young husband. The story spread like wildfire. News vans gathered outside the gates, journalists shouting questions. Eleanor faced the media storm with the same composure she had always worn, but Mark could see the exhaustion behind her calm. She refused interviews, issued one statement, and locked herself away. That evening, Mark entered her study without knocking. She sat at her desk, the glow of her phone screen illuminating her face. "They are tearing you apart out there," he said. "They always have," she replied quietly. He walked closer. "Then let me stand with you. Let me speak. Let them see the truth." Her eyes met his, fierce and trembling all at once. "The truth is that I used you, Mark. I wrote rules so I would not feel. You deserve better than the woman they are writing about." He shook his head. "The woman they are writing about is not the one I know. And maybe it is time they met her." Eleanor looked away, afraid of the hope rising in her chest. For the first time, the walls she built for decades began to crack. Outside, flashes from cameras lit the night like lightning. Inside, a decision waited, one that would change everything between them. The following morning, the storm hit in full force. News channels replayed Eleanor's photographs, dissecting her marriage like a business deal gone wrong. Commentators questioned her morals, her judgment, even her sanity. Outside the mansion gates, reporters shouted accusations, while cameras flashed like angry lightning. Mark stood beside the window, fists clenched. "We cannot hide forever," he said. Eleanor sat silently on the couch, her posture straight, but her eyes distant. "If I speak, they will twist every word. If I stay silent, they will write their own story. Either way, I lose." Mark moved closer. "Then let them see us, together. Not the headlines, not the contract, just us." She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Do you really think anyone will believe that?" He nodded. "I do not care if they believe it. I just want them to see who you really are." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she stood, smoothing her blazer. "There is a press conference at 3. If we are going to speak, we will do it on our terms." At exactly 3 o'clock, the mansion doors opened. The cameras erupted, blinding flashes filling the marble steps. Eleanor walked out first, composed and regal. Mark followed, his hands steady at her back. She faced the crowd. "Yes, our marriage began as a contract," she said clearly, "but somewhere along the way, it became something real. I will not apologize for finding companionship, nor will I let shame define love." The crowd fell silent. Mark took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers for everyone to see. The gesture was simple, but it silenced 1,000 rumors. For the first time, Eleanor Brooks looked free. The press conference video spread across every network within hours. Some headlines mocked, others praised, but most could not look away. The image of Eleanor Brooks standing hand in hand with her young husband became a symbol of quiet defiance. For the first time, she did not hide behind her reputation. She owned it. That night, the mansion was still again. The reporters were gone, the lights had dimmed, and the only sound was the steady crackle of rain against the windows. Mark found Eleanor in the conservatory, sitting among her favorite orchids. Her shoulders were relaxed, her face bare of makeup, her usual mask gone. "You were brilliant today," he said softly. She glanced at him, her voice calm. "I was terrified. Every word I said felt like standing on thin ice." He smiled gently. "Then you walked across it perfectly. They are good rated of, so ground adds sell view." Into unexpected. Eleanor set down her glass of water. "They will keep talking, Mark. People like them always do." "Let them," he replied. "The truth is out. You faced them, and you did not flinch. That is what matters." For a moment she just watched him, her eyes softening. "When this began, I thought I was saving myself from loneliness. I never expected you would be the one to save me from it." He reached for her hand, hesitant but sincere. You saved me first. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. Everything after that was my choice." Eleanor's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "Then maybe for once, we both chose right." End quote. The next morning, the front page of the city's largest newspaper carried a single headline: Eleanor Brooks speaks her truth. The article described her as courageous, graceful, and unapologetically human. The scandal that had threatened to destroy her had instead reminded people why they respected her in the first place. When the board of directors met the following week, every seat was full. Eleanor walked into the room with Mark beside her. Not one person dared to question her authority. Victor Hale, the executive who once mocked her, lowered his eyes when she entered. Eleanor began the meeting by saying, "Gentlemen, let us talk about the future." Her voice was steady, her presence unshaken. Afterward, as they left the building, Mark whispered, "You were incredible." She looked at him and said quietly, "No, we were." Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks. It felt like a new beginning. Neither of them had planned, but both finally deserved. Months passed, and the noise of the scandal faded into memory. The tabloids moved on to newer stories, and the world seemed to finally let Eleanor Brooks breathe again. The mansion, once filled with the echo of silence, now carried softer sounds: music, laughter, and the quiet comfort of two people who no longer needed to pretend. Mark had graduated from law school. The morning of his ceremony, Eleanor stood in the crowd, her silver hair gleaming under the sunlight. When his name was called, she clapped first and smiled wider than anyone else. Later, when they drove back home, Mark said quietly, "You know, I could not have done this without you." Eleanor glanced at him, her voice warm. "You did it because you are strong. I only reminded you that you were." They settled into a rhythm that felt natural, almost domestic. Mornings began with coffee and shared newspapers. Evenings often ended with long walks through the garden or quiet dinners on the balcony. The air between them was different now, lighter, honest, and unspokenly tender. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky gold, Eleanor led Mark to the art gallery she had built years ago to honor her late husband. The walls shimmered with portraits, each one capturing a chapter of her life. But at the center of the room hung a new painting, a landscape of the mansion's garden at dawn. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "The Second Beginning." Mark stared at it, touched. "When did you make this?" "I commissioned it last month," she said softly. "It is to celebrate the day everything changed, not the day we married, but the day we stopped pretending." He turned toward her, his heart pounding. "Eleanor." She took a small velvet box from her pocket and held it out. Inside was the same wedding band she had once given him as part of their agreement. Only now the inner band was engraved with a single word: choice. "I do not want this to be a contract anymore," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want it to be real, Mark. No terms, no conditions, just two people who choose each other freely." For the first time since they met, Mark was the one who could not speak. He reached for her hand, eyes wet with emotion. "You do not have to ask, Eleanor. You already have my answer." She smiled, tears glinting like pearls at the corners of her eyes. "Then let us begin again." Their 7 weeks later, close friends gathered in the garden for a small ceremony. There were no cameras, no reporters, no contracts, only music, the scent of roses, and the sound of promises whispered under the open sky. Eleanor wore a simple ivory dress, elegant and timeless. Mark stood beside her, no longer the desperate law student who needed saving, but the man who had found his home in her heart. When the officiant spoke the words, "You may kiss your bride," Mark hesitated for a brief moment, as if to make sure this was truly real. Eleanor laughed softly, took his face in her hands, and kissed him first. The crowd cheered, but all they could hear was each other's heartbeat. As the night fell, lanterns lit the garden. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you ever regret it, Mark? The way it all began?" He looked down at her and smiled. "Not for a second. Sometimes the wrong reason leads to the right person." She laughed quietly, her head resting on his chest. "Then let that be our story." And under the Texas stars, with the world finally quiet around them, Mark and Eleanor began the life they had never planned but had always been meant to find. For the first time, love was not an agreement, not an illusion, and not a secret. It was simply real.